Rock was the biggest design failure out of all the Pokemon types. Yes, even worse than Bug, Psychic, and Ice. See, unlike many other types, it is very obvious what Rock is supposed to be, the designated physical tank. In the beginning, back in Red and Green, Rock was advertised to the player as a tank early in the game via Brock. The game repeatedly emphasizes his rock-solid defense, his Pokemon take practically no damage from the majority of early game moves, and he instantly crumples your starter's special attack. While his Onix was the subject of my first ever video where I went into detail on its design as a tutorial boss, it is actually Geodude which is more important here, as it was basically the archetypal rock Pokemon for that era. Its stat spread heavily emphasizes high defense, decent attack, and low speed, implying it excels at tanking incoming hits and can deal some okay damage in return, but is really poor at initiating any fight and cannot sweep an opponent. Its low HP, however, means that it cannot tank indefinitely without external healing support from the player, and it will be gradually chipped away by repeated hits. Its non-existent special stat also means that it instantly crumples against special moves, and it can't make use of them either. All pretty stereotypical physical tank stuff so far. Nothing wrong with being designed like this. The problem is that Geodude and the rock type as a whole completely fail to live up to their intended design role. This failure is due to two main reasons: Pokemon's fundamental game mechanics and the balancing mess that is the Gen 1 type system. Let's start with that first point. In general, traditional game tanks have three objectives. Number 1, protect allies. Number 2, not die. And number 3, don't get in the way of the rest of the team. Pokemon as a single-player RPG game is fundamentally incompatible with these objectives. In other games, multiple party members are in an active state at all times. The tank is therefore shielding their allies while they are on field and doing their attacking, supporting, or healing jobs. However, Pokemon battles are structured differently. They function as a 1 versus 1, which changes the entire traditional RPG role dynamic because tanking requires you to replace your attacker or supporter on the field. This means that for a tank to succeed in Pokemon, they don't just need to be good at surviving, they also need to hit back or provide support too. This is why water types made for consistently good tanks. Moves like Bubble Beam, Surf, and Hydro Pump let them deal good damage while taking hits. In this capacity, Rock fails because they offered zero supportive capability and had awful attacks. Gen 1 had 2 rock attacks. Rock Throw was an early game move with high distribution and an acceptable 50 base power, but its appalling 65% accuracy made it worse than most normal moves. Rock Slide's 75 power and 90 accuracy were much better, but considering this was the upper limit of rock damage for the first 3 generations, one can't help but find it rather lacking compared to other late game moves like Earthquake or Fire Blast. The real problem was that this was a TM only move, meaning it was very missable and most players would be stuck with Rock Throw for much of the game. If any rock Pokemon wants to deal damage, it's probably relying on its ground typing to do so via Dig and Earthquake. Speaking of rock Pokemon, they weren't exactly helping the situation. Geodude and Graveler are good in the early and mid game, but cannot reach their final evolution without trading, guaranteeing it falls off by the late game for many players. Onix infamously has no attack. It also does not learn Sturdy, by the way.
What did I say, Brayden? What did I say? What the fuck?
Rhyhorn is encountered around the 6th badge in the Safari Zone, evolves at a really high level 42, and only learns normal moves via level up. Finally, all 3 fossils are great but are only obtainable at level 20 around the 7th badge. And remember, none of them learn Rock Slide via level up. It's pretty easy to see why early rock Pokemon aren't popular to use. They are good in the early game, fall off quickly in the mid game, and require painfully steep investment to keep up with the other types by the late game. Many of them are infamously weak to water and grass, sure, but their abysmal special stats meant any special attack would ruin them regardless of whether it's super effective or not. And as special attacks become increasingly common as the game progresses, Rock's usefulness dwindles accordingly. Why was Rock made this way? One word: normal. Normal comprised the majority of moves and Pokemon, so the three types advantaged over normal were heavily overvalued and overly counterbalanced in different ways to compensate as a result. In Rock's case, it was expected to be consistently taking half damage from most opponents, so it was given weaker offense to compensate. Since the trainer effectively acts as the healer, a Rock Pokemon could effectively sustain itself indefinitely and wear down the opponent over time. Makes some kind of sense, right? Well, no. Unlike with Ghost, Game Freak's expectation was totally incorrect. In theory, Rock was supposed to remain useful in the mid and late game to fight physical-typed opponents. But in practice, Rock fails because it doesn't interact with the types in the way they predicted. Rock has 4 resistances and 4 weaknesses. It resists normal, poison, flying, and fire, and is weak to water, grass, fighting, and ground. We'll give water and grass a pass. It's obviously meant to lose to them by design. It's everything else that's the problem. The flying resistance effectively did not matter in Gen 1. The most common flying move a player faced was the 35 power wing attack. Drill Peck had extremely limited distribution and was almost never encountered. Fly was a HM move not used by trainers. Unsky Attack was an awful endgame move that was simply irrelevant. In practice, there is no situation where a flying resist is ever useful. The poison resistance was similarly unhelpful. Poison Pokemon and moves were designed around the poison status's damage over time to compensate for their low base power and offensive stats. This made Rock's poison resistance redundant because poison moves had such low base damage that there was no point in halving it, and the poison status allowed them to bypass Rock's defenses anyway. The fire resistance was also questionable. Rocks had poor special stats, meaning they still took big damage from fire moves, and burn also cripples them. As for the other physical types, which it's supposed to tank, ground and fighting are super effective and thus smash past it as per design intent. The only Ghost, Gengar, has a huge special stat to hurt rocks with, and Ghost moves are non-existent anyway. It does beat Bug, but so does everything else, so that isn't an achievement. I'm Singaporean, we don't believe in consolation prizes. So to summarize, Rock loses to every special type except maybe Fire, which is a shaky matchup. It outright loses to 2 of the physical types, while a third is pretending to be a special type. Of the types it does have advantage over, one is designed to bypass defense to deal damage over time, one lacks meaningful moves to resist, and one is the weakest type in the game. The only thing Rock tanks properly is normal damage. That's it. So in the one situation where you fight an opponent which only has normal attacks, Rock is excellent. There is only one part of the game where this is guaranteed: the early game, before anyone learns non-normal moves. Anywhere else, Rock does an awful job at tanking. Quite the sad disparity from initial expectations to end-user experience, isn't it? In fact, Rock's failure was so catastrophic, Game Freak effectively gave up on it just 1 generation later. From Gen 2 onwards, Steel replaced Rock as the series' tank. Appropriately symbolized by Onix, the most iconic Rock Pokemon of Gen 1, evolving to Steelix. Steel fixed every mistake which Rock made in Gen 1. It resisted way more types, was immune to poison to ensure its defenses couldn't be bypassed, and actually had attacking moves to use. Metal Claw, Steel Wing, and Iron Tail weren't the best moves, sure, but they at least had acceptable distribution, power, and accuracy. Rock, meanwhile, got Rollout, which is at least better than Rock Draw. There is also Ancient Power, which was unironically the best Rock move in the game because it had perfect accuracy, but it wasn't even learned by most Rock Pokemon for some reason. Oh yeah, Rock Slide got buffed to flinch now, so at least Aerodactyl is happy. Sandstorm was also invented but only dealt chip damage in this generation, so it's quite mediocre. Despite these mediocre additions, however, Rock actually proved unexpectedly useful in Gen 2. While it still suffered all the same intrinsic problems from Gen 1, Johto's region design unintentionally stretched out Rock's period of usefulness. The low level curve meant that many Pokemon were stuck using normal moves for a long time. Early game flying and bug attacks now existed for Rock to tank, and there were much fewer poison Pokemon compared to Kanto. Rock was also conveniently advantaged over the first 3 gyms, and Ghost was physical back then, so they could actually tank Gengar Shadow Ball in the 4th gym. Rock Pokemon were also surprisingly good. Geodude and Onix were obtainable before the first gym. Sudowoodo was a really good mid-game encounter, with 100 attack and 115 defense, and could deal good damage because it actually learned Rock Slide naturally at level 28. Corsola was obtainable as soon as you get a good rod, and while it had poor stats, it at least had Recover at level 19. Shuckle is infamously a meme for its comical stat spread, but it was a very rare Encore user, making it a usable support. Steel may be superior, but it was also kept at a premium. Of the 5 new Steel Pokemon, Steelix and Scizor were locked behind a post-game item trade evolution. Skarmory was a Silver version exclusive found in an optional area around the 8th badge, and Forretress was a high-level evolution which required hit-butting trees for Pineco. Only Magnemite was easily obtainable as a normal route encounter after Ecruteak. For everything up until the 5th badge, you use Rock, and Rock will work well. It was now performing exactly as how it was originally envisioned back in Gen 1, as an early to mid-game physical tank. In a roundabout way, the same generation which replaced Rock as the series tank also provided the perfect environment for Rock to excel as a tank. I don't know if this was all intentional design or the result of multiple happy coincidences, but either way, the Rock type's defensive capabilities peaked in Gen 2. Oh yeah, Tyranitar also exists, but it's never seen in the game anyway and will never impact the overwhelming majority of Gen 2 players, so we'll just ignore it. Gen 3 was a mixed bag for the Rock type. Hoenn is not Johto and had a more conventional level curve, and the expanded move pools meant that Pokemon needed to rely less on normal moves. Steel Pokemon also became less exclusive and more easily obtainable, now sharing the traditional early game tank role with Rock in the form of the Aron line. This is also where we learned that Rock Steel was absolutely not a good type combo. The two having such similar defensive profiles led to a lot of redundancy with few actual benefits. Aggron, Bastiodon, Probopass, Stakataka, they keep trying this with more stats and it never works every time. Unsurprisingly, Hoenn's region design was also catastrophic for the Rock type's viability, making it unusable in the final third of the game. 7.8 out of 10, too much water. However, Rock now started displaying a shift in design ideology away from just being an early game tank. Many of the newly added Rock Pokemon were available at multiple points across the game, had good stats, secondary typings, and were trying many new things beyond just tanking. Both fossils evolved late but were obtainable in the mid-game. Armaldo had a 125 attack stat, which was exceptionally high by Gen 3 standards. Cradily had an unusual typing which neutralized Rock's common weaknesses, multiple stat buffs, and self-healing capability. Solrock and Lunatone were part psychic and dipped into support. Relicanth had weather synergy and a way to actually become fast. Regirock, the first Rock legendary, packed unexpectedly good 100 base attack and special defense in addition to 200 defense, allowing it to play as a slow mixed tank. Macargo was one of the worst Pokemon in the game, and is also actually a Gen 2 Pokemon, but since it was only found in the Kanto post-game, I guess we can count it as a Gen 3 Pokemon in spirit. The only Pokemon which played like a traditional Gen 1 tank was Nosepass, which shared Onix's in-game role, high defense, and non-existent HP and attack stats. Game Freak really loves their Onix-style tutorial bosses, don't they? Just like flying, Rock also received the unofficial honor honor of being a champion specialty type. Fittingly for a man named Stone, Steven has an equal amount of rock and steel Pokemon on his team at 3 each. Let's just ignore this MF who reflects physical. Gen 4 is where rock finally completes its design shift from awkward early game tank to offensive powerhouse. I think this is the type which saw the most design upgrades within this generational shift. This shift was perfectly reflected in the design of the first boss, Rourke and Cranidos. Unlike Brock's Onyx and Roxanne's Nose Pass, Cranidos is a glass cannon focusing on attack and can crush an entire team if given the opportunity. Rock also gets credit for having the single most impactful TM in the franchise, Stealth Rock. This support move made having a rock weakness into the biggest death knell any Pokemon could have. Sure, its huge distribution meant it wasn't being used exclusively by rock Pokemon, but this is still a massive impact being generated by the type itself. Offensively, Rock finally received a top-tier attack move in Stone Edge, which allowed rock Pokemon to output massive damage, assuming they aren't missing half the time at least. Meanwhile, Hit Smash offers immense wall-breaking 150 base power in exchange for the 50% recoil destroying the user's defensive capabilities without rock hit protection. Every rock Pokemon also received a new setup move, Rock Polish, letting them try to get speedy and sweep. Emphasis on try. That one didn't work out quite as well, but hey, you gotta respect the vision. Defensively, Sandstorm was also buffed to provide a 50% special defense boost to rock types, which wasn't as crazy as it sounds because most rock Pokemon had awful special defense anyway. If anything, that was more of a Tyranitar buff. Still, it was appreciated nonetheless, and future Pokemon would go on to make greater use of it as a team archetype. You could easily see their design logic through these moves. Abandon all pretense of tanking, go full offense, and ensure that having a rock weakness actually mattered. Safe to say, they succeeded. Perhaps too well. They've been trying to deal with Stealth Rock ever since. After that, Rock more or less continued along this trajectory for the next several generations. It didn't get many noteworthy new moves, but most new rock Pokemon subverted the stereotypical high defense but low speed stat spread in different ways. Pokemon like Caracosta, Crustle, Barbaracle, Tyrantrum, and Minior were designed to be slow tanks with ways to become fast sweepers due to setup moves like Shell Smash and Dragon Dance. Colossal's ability afforded a riskier version of this, instantly maxing out its speed if it tanks a water or fire move. Some other Pokemon like Archeops, Terrakion, Lycanroc, and Glimmora were built for speed and offense from the outset. Even seemingly traditional bulky tanks had weird twists to them. Carbink was a fairy with weird support utility, Garganicle focused on passive damage and regeneration, Alolan Golem was a novelty physical electric type with Galvanized Explosion, and Gigalith was later reworked into a Sandstorm support and also had a ridiculous 135 attack stat. The only times a rock type plays like a traditional defensive tank nowadays is when it gets paired with the steel type, and it doesn't work. At the beginning of the video, I claimed that rock was the biggest failure of the type system, and that was true. No other type failed at its original purpose quite as catastrophically as rock did back in Gen 1, to the point where a whole new type was invented to replace it. But even if it started as a failure, it didn't stay as one. Rock picked itself back up, tried new things, reinvented itself, and eventually found success. It really is quite the inspirational comeback story. Maybe we can make a movie out of this. Oh, I know, we could call it Rocky. And that's another type down. If you've enjoyed the video, leave it a like so that the algorithm thinks I make good content. What do you think about rock? You've got a favorite rock Pokemon? Leave me a comment about it. Mine's Onyx, but hey, I'm a little biased there. What type should we do next, I wonder? Well, there's only one logical sequel to rock, isn't there?